Hello and welcome to Freedom Watch, your daily dose of raw liberty, streaming online at foxnews.com. I'm your host, Judge Andrew Napolitano, here defending freedom, defending your natural rights, and defending your right to have a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. Independent voters helped elect Barack Obama to the presidency. The independents were also crucial in voting out Democrats they were unhappy with, for example, in Virginia, in New Jersey, and most recently in Massachusetts. A sizable and very influential portion of these independent voters consist of libertarians. There's been an ongoing debate online recently about how this voting bloc and how the folks who comprise it will vote in the upcoming midterm elections, and if they'll be the pivotal swing group that swings away from Democrats, or will they be the spoilers and split the Republican vote in two? Stated differently, will Republicans return to their Barry Goldwater roots? Joining me now is David Boaz, Vice President of the Cato Institute and author of the very insightful article that got me talking about this, The Libertarian Vote in the Age of Obama. David, welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you.
So you did a study, and you asked some very basic questions to find out who was a libertarian. Do you believe in more government or less? Can our problems be solved with the heavy hand of government or with the free market? And you isolated the libertarians, and then you asked them some questions. What did you find?
Well, the first thing we found out in this study, David Kirby and I found out that there are libertarian voters, and you don't see pollsters or TV pundits or political consultants talking about them very often. But we estimate, based on the best public opinion research we had, that they're 14% of the electorate, which is a big chunk. And we also show in the study that a lot of other people, like Gallup and a Zogby poll, show that libertarians are a lot more than 14%. So the first point is just to say not everybody falls into the red team or the blue team. There's a lot of people who are basically libertarian.
Now, how did you get to How did you get to the 14%? Because that number startles me but gratifies me that it's as large as it is. That's enough to sway almost any election.
Well, Clive Crook, who used to be with The Economist and now is with The Atlantic, wrote when we did this about 3 years ago, I can't believe it's only 14%. This is a country based on liberty. Why is it only 14%? So it depends on your standard, obviously, for how strict you do it. What we did was we took 3 questions from the American National Election Study about whether you think the government should do more or do less, whether you think the government is a threat to freedom, whether you think the government should push traditional values or stay out of pushing any set of values. And we said, well, if you gave the libertarian answer to all 3 of these, we're going to call you a libertarian. And then what we found was that group of voters usually votes about 2/3 Republican. But in 2004, they moved away from Bush, and in 2006, they moved farther away from Democratic congressional candidates. So they were voting about 50-50. And what we've been trying to tell Republicans and Democrats is these people really are swing voters. They went from 72% for Bush to 50% for Republican candidates 6 years later. That's a big difference. This year, we found out that they swung back to McCain, presumably because they saw Obama as just being farther left on economics than Kerry was, and they thought that having a Democratic president with a Democratic Congress in a time of financial crisis was particularly dangerous. And we don't have data, but we think there's corroborating evidence that they're the kind of voters who have now moved away from Obama and voted Republican in New Jersey, Virginia, and Massachusetts.
If you believe, as I do, and as my next guest, Cody Willard from the Fox Business Network does, there's not a dime's worth of difference between either of the parties. They're both big government. One likes war and deficits. The other likes taxes and transfer payments. So does it matter which way libertarians vote unless there's a Ron Paul on the ballot or unless they can pull some Republican into the liberty camp?
Well, I'd put it this way. It matters to the candidates and to their consultants. So it might be that if we can get people to recognize that there is a libertarian electorate, they might actually start trying to appeal to them. Now, I know the risk is that they use libertarian rhetoric to get elected and then they don't do much about it. President Obama did talk about getting out of Iraq. people at least thought he was going to be more civil libertarian than Bush.
Yes, they did.
But he hasn't been.
They did.
But he hasn't been too good on that.
I thought he'd be more civil libertarian as well. I thought he was going to close Gitmo. I thought he was going to get rid of the state secrets doctrine, where the government, keeps truth from the American people and keeps a just outcome from occurring in a courtroom under the ruse that the information is too dangerous for people to know about. I thought he was going to do away with holding people up and locking people up and throwing away the key, but he's not. He hasn't been he hasn't embraced one single civil liberties aspect I can think of, except for some jury trials here in New York.
Well, he's pulled back a little teeny bit on the drug war, so that's a good thing. I do think he's trying to close Gitmo. I'm not sure exactly why it's going to end up being a better idea to imprison people in Illinois rather than to imprison them in Cuba, but he does seem to be moving on that. But go back 8 years and look at Bush. Bush campaigned saying, my opponent trusts government, I trust you. Right. And he also promised a more humble foreign policy. And obviously anybody who voted for him, and a lot of libertarians did, right. Anybody who voted for him on those planks didn't get what they voted for. Right. So it is a real problem. So in this particular study, and of course I wrote a book on libertarianism where I advocate government should be a lot smaller. In this particular study, I'm just trying to point out there's a significant number of people who would like to see government at least somewhat more out of your business and somewhat more out of your personal life, and candidates ought to be looking at that. And unfortunately, what we're usually stuck with is the Republicans claiming to be better on taxes and spending, whether they really are, it's another question, and the Democrats claiming to be better on peace and personal freedom, but neither party giving these libertarian voters the package that they'd like to see.
All right, David Boaz, before I let you go, I know that you're not responsible for what other people say about your work, but I'm looking at an article written by Catherine Mangu Ward, who writes for Reason. You and I both know her. The headline of the article is, Young Libertarians Flaky, Increasingly Republican-Leaning. Did you find anything out in your study that shows that young libertarians are flaky?
Well, I guess the best argument would be what we did find is that while most libertarians voted for McCain, young libertarians gave a majority of their votes to Obama. So she may have considered that flaky by itself, or she may have thought that switching from Obama to now being more pro-Republican is flaky. I'm just going to say, hey, when the facts come in and things turn out to be different, you thought Obama was maybe not so extreme on economics and was going to be better on things like the drug war and gay rights and the war, then maybe it made sense for some people to vote for him. And then once you see that he didn't do those things, it makes sense to move away from him. So I'm not going to call that flaky. I just think it's a sign that there's a swing vote here that people ought to pay attention to.
David Boaz from the Cato Institute. Always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.